History of Linux. In 1964, Bell Laboratories started a project in New Jersey, and their purpose was to make an operating system that will be multi-user operating system. In 1969, they withdrew from this project because it was very difficult for them. In this project group there was Dennis Ritchie and Ken Thompson. They were members of that group of 5 people, and these two still thought of working on the project. These two started again to work on this project, and they called it Unix, Uniplex Information and Computing Service. This Unix was free for all, open source. In 1975 there was a version of Unix v6. As it was free, the private companies started building their commercial version of Unix, which were paid. The versions which were made from Unix were IBM made X, some made Solaris, Apple made Mac OS, HP made UX. There was another flavor of Unix called Linux, but Linux story started from. There was a student named Linus Torvald. Linus Torvald has to do some work in his university on a project. There he found out about Unix to work on his project, but Unix was outdated or old compared to new versions of Unix like Mac OS, UX, X, Solaris, but this was paid around $5,000. Now Linus Torvald felt it is wrong that he is not able to learn because it is not free, and he thought of building his own version, so people who could not afford the commercial version of Unix can use his free Linux. You must have heard of that. Linux is the copy or continuation of Unix, but it is not true. Instead, Linus Torvald written the code of Linux from start, but it is also correct that for understanding he learned Unix, but more than Unix he learned about Minix, which was made by Andrew Tannenbaum. With the learning from Minix, Linus Torvald made his Linux in 1991, and this got very popular as it was free to all or open source. In between 1991 to 1995 there was a movement called Free Software Movement. This movement was because some companies were charging very high for the software and everyone was not able to learn. Inside this movement, there was another movement called GNU. In this movement, they made many software free. Early Linux is a kernel and not operating system. An operating system consists of kernel and softwares. So the softwares of GNU combined with Linux kernel and Linux operating system came into existence. Now from Linux many other companies made their own versions like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Fedora, Debian, Ubuntu, Kali Linux, MX Linux and many more. Ubuntu Linux is the third largest Linux distro used in the world, and it was created by an African, and Ubuntu means teamwork. For non-technical background, an operating system can be used in 2 ways. One is CLI, which is command line interface, and the other GUI, which is graphical user interface. Command line means you just typing commands on a black screen, and in GUI means you can see the folder, buttons, and more. It's more visual in GUI, that's why it's too easy to learn. Overview of what we learned so far. Linux is a kernel, not operating system. Linux is not a Unix derivative, it was written from scratch. A Linux distribution is the Linux kernel and the collection of software that together create operating system. Linux features advantages. It is open source. Windows operating system is very good and easy to use. Then why companies prefer to use Linux? It is because the source code of Windows is only with Microsoft and they didn't share it with anyone. Now if you want to run Windows, you have to purchase a license for Windows to work on your computer, and one operating system comes around 14,000 to 15,000 rupees. Imagine if you have 50 computers in your organization, then you have to pay 7 lakhs rupees, and on the other hand, Linux is open source. In simple words, it's free and it comes with different distros according to the use of individual. Like if someone wants to do penetration testing, he can use Kali or Parrot Linux. For home use there is Ubuntu. It is secure. You must heard that of Linux is very much secure than Windows, as there is a low risk of viruses and secure from hackers. The reason is when the virus enters in Windows in a folder, it starts spreading in every folder and the entire drive and corrupts the Windows, and in 4 to 7 days it slows down the PC. In another hand, if the virus enters in a Linux folder, then it doesn't spread in rest of folders, and in Linux you can just delete the folder to remove the virus. If you use Windows, you have to additionally pay for the antivirus, but in Linux there is no need for antivirus. And if the antivirus is unable to remove the virus, then you have to reinstall the Windows, and this consumes a lot of time and it may lead to data loss, and it's not possible to do this with servers. Linux is hard to learn, so most hackers don't go to hack it because they need to learn 1 to 2,000 commands, and on other hand there is Windows, so hackers prefer to hack Windows, and just 5% of attacks are on Linux. Simplified updates for all installed software. Here you can give some simple commands to update. Lightweight. Lightweight means the size of the operating system is less and consumes less RAM compared to Windows. Multi-user. A single CPU can be used by multiple users at the same time with different windows. Multiple distributions. In Windows there is no choice as there is only Microsoft making Windows, but in Linux there is multiple options like Red Hat, Debian, Fedora, CentOS, Kali Linux, Parrot, Elementary, Mint, MX Linux, Manjaro and many more. General information about Linux. In Linux folder called directory. In Linux administrator is called root user. In Linux softwares are called packages. In Windows, there will be C drive, but in Linux there is // which is the top-level directory. File system hierarchy. Root means you are logged in as administrator inside the root. Home means you are logged in as a user inside home. Boot in this all the system files stored which helps in turning on the PC. The technical term for this is post. Full form is power on self-test. etc. It contains all configuration files of the hardware. USR by default softwares are installed in this directory. Bin contains commands which are used by all the users including the root user. Bin contains commands used by the root user only. apt optional application software package. If you like installed Google Chrome, then that package will be stored in apt directory. Dev essential devices files are saved in dev directory. Any device attached to the system. Example: printer, mouse, keyboard, etc.